Hey guys, Tony here, back with the second part of my EDH deck tech for Sedris. So yeah, today I'm going to be going over the creatures. So I already went over Sedris in the first part, so if you want to know what Sedris does or why I play him, just watch the first part. I'll put an annotation in the video. So yeah, I'll go over these in mana cost order, so starting with the lows. So first we'll go with the 2 drops. I don't have any 1 drop creatures. We have Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Mage is awesome because he gives all of your spells recursion, and since we're sort of a reanimator deck, we like to mill ourselves or loot a lot. So we're usually gonna have lots of spells in our graveyard. So this guy gives our deck lots of versatility. And next we have Nezumi Grave Robber. And this guy is good for both reanimating and sort of like hosing your opponent's reanimation things. So you could exile cards from your opponent's graveyard, and then if your opponent's graveyard has no cards in it, you could flip them, and then you could just start reanimating things. So always, it's always good to just be able to reanimate things. And that's what the theme of the deck is. So he's good for that. And we got Phantasmal Image, rounding out the 2 drops. Phantasmal Image is a really good card in that he's a very flexible card. He's a 2 mana clone. Clones are always good in EDH. And the fact that he dies when he's targeted isn't really relevant since most things that target it are going to kill it anyway. So he's a really flexible card that is good when you're ahead in the game, good when you're behind. He's just all around flexible guy. Next we have Trinket Mage, another sweet card. It allows us to tutor for artifacts with converted mana cost 1 or less. And in this deck, there's quite a few. We have the artifact lands if we need to fix our mana. We have Soul Ring, which is probably the most frequent target. We have Sensei's Divining Top, which is also a good target. And we have Skull Clamp. So this guy tutors all those things. Tutoring is always a good in EDH, and this guy tutors for useful things like artifacts. So, yep. And next we have Fleshback Marauder. He's good in that he's sort of a removal spell on a stick, and sometimes we want to sacrifice our own creatures when he comes into play. So if you don't know, when he comes into play, each player sacrifices a creature. So most of the times you'll sacrifice him, but sometimes if you have like a giant fatty in play, you want to sacrifice that so you can reanimate it. So that's why we have him. Next we have sort of a niche card, Shadow Mage Infiltrator. He's not a very staple card or a frequently played card, but I like him a lot. Um, he allows us to draw cards, which is always good. That's really all he's there for. He's basically a worse Phyrexian Arena, but honestly, Phyrexian Arena is good enough where a worse version of it is always fine. Next we have Phyrexian Metamorph, which is another clone effect. This one's even arguably better, maybe not, than Phantasmal Image in that it can copy artifacts, which is good since sometimes I'll target my own Soul Ring or I'll target one of my opponent's awesome artifacts. Most of the time he copies a creature, but he's just a very flexible card, and clones are, as I said, always great in EDH. And next we have Archaeomancer, another way to recur our spells which are in our graveyard. Being able to reuse your resources is always a good in EDH, and this guy is one way to reuse your resources so you never run out of resources. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum, another EDH staple, I would say. He's good in our deck since he's good when you play him and good when he dies. And we want things to die a lot. Mass removal spells, board sweepers. So yeah, he's a good guy. He also is a great blocker since no one wants to attack into him since you draw a card when he dies. So yeah, he's a great solid card. Next we have Disciple of Bolas. This guy's awesome. When he comes to play, you sack a guy, then you draw X cards and gain X life, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So sometimes you'll just play him, just sack a fatty, like Runescarred Demon, which we'll go over later. You just like draw 6 cards, gain 6 life, which is insane. And sacking it isn't even a bad thing in our deck. Usually sacking creatures is good since you just reanimate the next turn. So basically this guy, gaining life is good in EDH. Like as a side note, like just gain life cards usually aren't good, but things that have gain life as an extra thing are pretty sweet. And drawing cards is always awesome, as I said before. So this guy's sweet. Next, we got the 5 drops. We have Mulldrifter, another sort of EDH staple. Another flexible card where you could play him as a 3 mana draw 2 cards or a 5 mana 2/2 flyer that draws you 2 cards, which is both options are good. So that's why we play him. Next, we have a sweet one. We have Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, and he allows us to put clones of our creatures in play for like for a turn. So basically, what he does, he has haste. You could tap him, and then you put a copy of your creature that you control, and he gains haste, and then you have to sacrifice him at the end of turn. So he is really good with enter the battlefield things like Runescar Demons. You just get a free tutor out of him, or just beating in. But he's another just a very powerful card. Probably any red deck should probably run him, since he's a very powerful card. Next, we have Body Double, which is another sweet one for reusing our resources. And since we have lots of things in our graveyard, since we loot and discard and mill ourselves a lot, we have lots of creatures in our graveyard. So this is another way to reuse our resources. That's sort of a theme of this deck, is reusing resources, and this guy is one way to do it. And next we have Puppeteer Click, another pretty sweet card. So what he does is when he comes into play, we can gain control of a creature in an opponent's graveyard until end of turn, and then have to sack it. Or I guess it's removed from the game. And it has Persist, so it's another thing that people don't want to attack into. It's very good in stealing your opponent's things, using your opponent's resources, which is the theme of this deck. Just using all the resources you can. Nothing's not available to you, and including your opponent's graveyard. That's what this guy's here for. Next, we have our 6-drops. We have Wormcrawl Engine, another thing that people just don't want to attack into. And he's also good when you sack him, or when he dies. As I said, we want things that are good when they're on the field and when they die. So this guy's good when he dies, since he puts 2 tokens into play. So yeah, that's why I run him. He gains you life, which is always pretty good when it's not just gain life. Gain life as a sort of a side option is always sweet. That's what this guy does. Next, we have Dead Navigator, one of my favorite cards in EDH. What he does is he helps you abuse ETB effects. So you could pay 1 in a blue when you soul bond him with something, and you could blink either him or the soul bonded creature. So if you have him on like a Runescar Demon or a Sphinx of Bethune, it gets pretty gross, since you could just Factor Fiction every turn for 2 mana, or tutor every turn for 2 mana. It also can be used to protect him from removal spells. So if someone goes to like Doomblade your guy, you just blink him, and then the Doomblade fizzles. So this guy's awesome. Next, we have Duplicant. Duplicant is another card that is sort of a removal spell on a stick. He's good for reanimating, since he just removes the guy, actually exiles him, which is even better if you just don't want to deal with something. And he gets the power and toughness. So it's just another flexible card, pretty much goes into all EDH decks. Next, we have Consecrated Sphinx. Very, very, very powerful card. Whenever your opponents would draw a card, you draw 2 cards. So in like a 4-player EDH game, if this thing goes a turn without being killed, you've pretty much won the game, or you've put in a position where it's going to be really hard to lose, since you just draw stupid amounts of cards. And this guy basically has to eat up a removal spell, which is always good. You want your opponents to use up their removal spells on things that you could just reanimate. And this guy's another thing which is very powerful. Next, we have Grave Titan. He's not amazing in this deck, but he is good for reanimating on like mass quantities. So if you Living Death, this guy just sort of helps put blockers on the field and just maintains your board presence. He's not too amazing on his own, but if you like clone him, if you like Rider Replication this guy, it's insane. He's just very good at just putting power on the board. So like late game, if you're 1v1, this guy puts power on the board that you need to win. Next, we have Runescar Demon, probably one of the best reanimation targets in the deck. When he comes into play, you get to tutor, which is like always good in EDH. Most of the time, for the rest of these creatures, the 7 drops and up, I'm usually not hard casting them most of the time. I will say like 80% of the time I'll reanimate them. So this guy's almost never going to be cast for 7, which is great. Next, we have Chancellor of the Spires. Another great card that uses your opponent's resources. So when it comes into play, you can cast an instant or sorcery card from your opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. And then as an added bonus, if it's in your opening hand, you can mill everyone for 7. So just, again, adds resources that you could use, which is great. And next we have Shouldered Whispering one. So it helps you reanimate things, and it's a reanimation target of its own. It also makes your opponent sack things, which is good since you want to be able to attack your opponents. The Swamp Wonk isn't really much of a thing, since you don't really want to attack with her too much, since you just want to protect her as much as possible, since he helps you reanimate things, which is awesome. Next, we have Factor Fiction Sphinx, or a Sphinx of Bethune. A great reanimation target. As I said, I'm not usually going to be hard casting this guy, but he is just great. Factor Fiction is really good in this deck, since you always want things to your hands, but it's even better in this deck, since if you put things in your graveyard, if your opponents put things in your graveyard, it's not necessarily not available to you. We want in this deck we want to use all the resources we can, and that includes our graveyard. So Factor Fiction in this deck is awesome because like both piles you get to use, so it's awesome. Next we have Thraxmundar, another card that we rarely hard cast, but he is a haste guy, and whenever he attacks, your opponent sacks a guy, and then you put a 1/1 counter on him. So for whenever your opponent sacks a guy, so it's really good after a sweeper, and you just keep, especially in 1v1, after a sweeper, you just keep attacking with this guy. They just can't gain a board presence unless they play two guys to turn, and after that, it's probably gonna be too late since this guy's gonna be like an 8/8. So this is a very powerful card. It's just a sweet card all around. He's a zombie assassin. I mean, who doesn't like zombie assassins? Next we have Myojin of Night's Reach, the only like 7+ drop that we actually hardcast most of the time since we can't really reanimate it. So basically, when it comes to play, if you played it from your hand, which is very important, it has a divinity counter on it. Then if you remove the counter, each opponent discards their hand. So you really want to play this with multiple people since everyone just gangs up on you since no one likes discarding their hand. But if you get it down to 1v1 and you play this guy and your opponent discards their hand, you've pretty much won the game since your opponent's is top decking. And if you have cards in hand, your opponent's top decking, it's really hard for you to lose the game. So that's what this guy's there as like a finisher once you're down to like 1v1. And lastly, we have Jingatax's Core Augur. Again, never, ever card cast this guy. He costs 10, but most of the time I'll reanimate him. I have tons of reanimation effects in this deck, which I'll go over in the next part of this video. But yeah, he's a 5/4 flash, and then at the beginning of your end step, you draw 7 cards, which is insane by itself. Drawing 7 cards almost makes you win the game on the spot. And then as an added bonus, each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7, which again wins you the game. If this guy goes around the table and everyone discards their hand, which like rarely happens, but if it does, you've won the game. So this guy's there as a reanimation target that basically wins you the game if it's not dealt with, similar to like Consecrated Sphinx, but this guy even more so. But again, we never hardcast him. So yeah, those were the creatures in our deck. So I hope you enjoyed and stick around for the third part, which is hopefully coming soon. Have a nice day and goodbye.